According to the Torah, 42 stopping places of the people of Israel in the wilderness were recorded. But the Kabbalistic tradition reveals something much deeper. Those 42 stages also represent a spiritual path throughout life. Every challenge, every change, every decision is part of a purposeful journey. Discover the meaning of these 42 stages today.
Shalom, shalom, and welcome once again to your channel, La Mishnah TV, where each week we study the asterisk parashah, asterisk, or weekly biblical portion. This week we have a double study covering the asterisk parashiot, Masei, and Matot. What if I told you that the story of your life is already mapped out in one of the most enigmatic chapters of the entire Torah? When most people arrive at asterisk Parashat Matot, they encounter a long list of place names, 42 encampments in the wilderness. At first glance, it appears to be a geographical list, almost a tedious one. Yet the sages of Israel taught that there is not a single unnecessary word in the Torah. If God chose to record each of those stations, it is because they conceal one of Judaism's deepest spiritual secrets. For centuries, commentators, rabbis, Kabbalists, and Hasidic masters have seen far more than a historical itinerary in these 42 journeys. They have seen a map of the human soul, the process of spiritual transformation, and the path every person travels from their limitations to the fulfillment of their purpose. In this lesson, we will undertake a serious, in-depth, and well-documented study, drawing upon both traditional Jewish sources and contemporary academic research. First, we will examine the 42 stations according to traditional Judaism, analyzing the teachings of the Torah, Midrash, Rashi, Ramban, the Zohar, and other great commentators regarding the significance of each stage of Israel's journey through the wilderness. Second, we will explore the perspectives of modern biblical criticism and academia. We will analyze what specialists say about the list's origins, its historical context, its literary composition, and the various theories developed by researchers over the last 2 centuries. And finally, we will arrive at the true gem of this lesson. We will study each of the 42 stations one by one through the lens of the Kabbalah of the Arizal. We will discover how this great teacher taught that Israel's journey is also the journey of the soul, and how each of these stages can help us understand our trials, changes, crises, and spiritual growth. If you have ever wondered why certain experiences seem to repeat in your life, why there are times of wilderness, bitterness, waiting, and revelation, this class may offer you a completely new perspective. Prepare to discover that the 42 stations do not belong solely to the past of the people of Israel. They may also be describing, with surprising precision, the path you yourself have traveled since the day you began your journey through this world. This is Abel Flores, journalist and founder of La Mishnah TV. Thank you for studying with us, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the like button. I also invite you to visit our website, lamishnah.com, where you will find a written summary of this class, as well as much more content on Kabbalah, Second Temple Judaism, and related topics. Before addressing why the Torah devotes an entire chapter to listing the desert encampments, it is useful to view the subject from 2 perspectives. First, the Jewish tradition, the Tanakh, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Midrash, the Rishonim, the Zohar, the teachings of the Arizal, and Hasidism. Then, the academic reading and modern biblical criticism. And there is a fundamental rule. Always distinguish between what the text explicitly states and the interpretations developed later. The central point is clear. The Torah does not record these encampments solely out of geographic or historical interest. In Jewish tradition, chapter 33 of the Book of Numbers is far more than an itinerary. It is Israel's national memory, a teaching on exile and redemption, a spiritual cartography, and, from the perspective of Kabbalah, a map of the soul's process of elevation. The Parashat Matot-Masei begins with a simple yet profoundly significant phrase. These are the journeys of the children of Israel. From there, the text traces the path from Ramesses to the plains of Moab, opposite Jericho. Tradition speaks of 42 encampments, or stages. Some scholars distinguish between 42 locations and 41 movements, yet the message remains intact. The constant repetition of they set out from and camped at transforms a simple journey into a powerful lesson on how every stage of the path serves a purpose in the spiritual formation of a people. Now, why does the Torah preserve such a detailed list of every desert encampment? At first glance, it might appear to be a simple geographical record, yet great commentators uncover a far deeper purpose. Rashi, citing Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan, offers a surprising explanation. The list demonstrates that Israel did not wander chaotically for 40 years. In fact, during the 38 years following the episode of the spies, the people made only about 20 major moves. The message is clear. God did not subject Israel to endless, aimless movement. On the contrary, the relationship between God and his people was marked by mercy, even amidst judgment. Enumerating the encampments corrects the impression of ceaseless punishment and reveals a divine guidance that was orderly and compassionate. The Midrash Bamidbar Rabbah takes this idea to an even more human level through a moving comparison. Imagine a king traveling with his sick son. When they finally return home, the father says to him, "Here we rested. Here you were cold. Here your head hurt." The goal is not to recall a map, but to imbue the suffering with new meaning. Each stop gains significance because it is part of a story of love, care, and restoration. This is how the Midrash understands the list in Numbers 33. God remembers every stage of Israel's journey because no experience, however painful, occurred outside the scope of his companionship. For his part, Nachmanides, known as Ramban, adds a historical dimension. To him, this account of locations constitutes concrete testimony to the miracles of the desert. The Torah presents neither an abstract narrative nor a symbolic legend. It preserves specific names, routes, and stages to affirm that these events actually took place in history. Spiritual memory is anchored in real places, for biblical faith is built not on isolated ideas, but on the lived experience of a people who walked with God step by step. Jewish mystical tradition takes the significance of the 42 desert encampments to an even deeper level through the concept of the Shem Mem-Bet, the 42-letter divine name. Although the Torah never explicitly writes it out, the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Kiddushin 71a, affirms the existence of a sacred 42-letter name, noting that it should be transmitted only to individuals who are discreet, humble, spiritually mature, and capable of safeguarding such exalted knowledge. The Zohar expands upon this teaching, explaining that the 42 letters are linked to the very structure of creation. In its symbolic language, the universe was engraved or established through these letters connected to the holy name. This is not a physical description of the world's origin, but rather a way of expressing that all reality possesses a spiritual order stemming from divine wisdom. From this idea arises one of Kabbalah's most influential associations. The 42 letters represent the creation of the universe. The 42 encampments represent the exodus from Egypt. The 42 stages symbolize the soul's ascent, and the 42 movements reflect the process of liberating oneself from limited consciousness toward a consciousness closer to God. In other words, Israel's historical journey becomes the model for the inner journey of every human being. This connection is notably evident in the Ana BeKoach prayer, traditionally attributed to Rabbi Nehunia ben Hakana. Its structure is not accidental. It consists of 7 lines of 6 words each, totaling 42 words. According to Kabbalistic tradition, the initial letters of these words correspond to the asterisk Shem Mem-Bet, transforming the prayer into a meditation on creative power, spiritual transformation, and the path leading from slavery both external and internal, to true freedom. Beyond their historical and mystical dimensions, the 42 desert stations can also be read as an extraordinary map of human psychological and spiritual development. From this perspective, Israel's journey ceases to be merely the history of a people and becomes a reflection of the inner journey every person is called to undertake. It all begins with the departure from slavery. This involves not only leaving the territory of Egypt, but also breaking free from an identity shaped by fear, dependency, and the limitations of the past. Yet freedom never arrives with immediate answers. Next comes disorientation, that moment when old certainties vanish and new ones have not yet taken shape. Then come the trials of desire. Hunger, thirst, and a constant longing for Egypt represent the temptation to return to the familiar, even if it meant living in bondage. Later, a confrontation with authority arises, reflected in the rebellions against Moses. In reality, this is the human struggle against the discipline required for growth and character transformation. The next step is the purification of speech. In the desert, complaints and grumbling appear, followed ultimately by prayer. Tradition teaches that words do not merely express reality, they create it. Thus, learning to speak rightly is an essential part of the spiritual path. Then comes a decisive moment, the death of the previous generation. More than a biological event, this symbolizes the abandonment of old mental structures, inherited habits, and ways of thinking that cannot enter the promised land. Finally, the people prepare to cross the Jordan. A new awareness emerges of mission, responsibility, boundaries, and heritage. It is no longer simply a matter of walking, but of understanding the purpose of that journey. For this reason, the Torah's constant repetition, they set out from and camped at, is far from monotonous. It encapsulates the fundamental rhythm of all spiritual life, moving forward and pausing, breaking with the past and finding a new balance, setting out into exile and learning finally to inhabit the promised land that God prepares both in history and in the human heart. If we shift from Jewish tradition to modern academic research, we encounter a different, though not necessarily opposing, approach. Biblical criticism examines Numbers 33 as a carefully crafted document with a purpose that extends far beyond merely recording a geographical itinerary. Many scholars note that the list of stopping points in Numbers 33 does not fully align with the scattered references found in Exodus and other sections of the book of Numbers itself. Researchers, such as those associated with the Torah.com, point out that two methods of preserving this memory likely coexisted: brief travel notes transmitted through various traditions, and a continuous organized list like the one found in Numbers 33. Both preserve the same historical memory, yet differ in various details, reflecting the text's process of transmission and redaction. The documentary hypothesis often links this chapter to the priestly tradition due to its repetitive, precise, and almost administrative style. The recurring formula, they set out from and camped at, possesses an archival quality aimed at structuring collective memory. In modern scholarship, this structure is not viewed as accidental. Rather, it serves to organize the wilderness narrative, recall episodes of obedience and rebellion, and literally prepare for the entry into the promised land. From this perspective, Numbers 33 simultaneously fulfills several functions. It serves a memorial function by summarizing the entire Exodus experience prior to crossing the Jordan. It acts as a legitimizing force by presenting the conquest of Canaan as the culmination of a journey guided by God. It also performs a redactional function, integrating diverse geographical traditions into a single coherent narrative. Furthermore, it holds liturgical and narrative significance, transforming a series of movements into an orderly sequence that could be remembered and passed down through generations. Finally, it fulfills a crucial function regarding identity. For academic scholarship, Israel is defined not merely by the land it possesses, but by the journey it undertook. Before becoming a settled people, it was a people in transit. And that pilgrim identity, forged in the desert, became one of the deepest and most enduring features of biblical memory. When comparing Jewish tradition with academic scholarship, we discover that both study the same text, but ask different questions. Understanding this distinction prevents many misunderstandings. Rabbinic and Kabbalistic traditions ask, what is the spiritual significance of this list? Their focus is not so much on reconstructing the text's origins as on uncovering the message God conveys through it. Each desert encampment becomes a lesson regarding the relationship between the Creator and humanity, the growth of the soul, and the purpose of history. Biblical criticism, by contrast, poses a different question. How, when, and why was this list composed? It analyzes literary sources, geography, style, redaction processes, and the text's formation over time. Its goal is to understand how the document we know today as Numbers chapter 33 came into being. These are different questions, yet they are not necessarily incompatible. One interprets the text's meaning as sacred scripture. The other investigates its historical and literary development. Tension arises when scholarship identifies various traditions or layers of composition, whereas the traditional reading perceives a providential unity inspired by God. In many respects, both perspectives illuminate different dimensions of the same reality. For this reason, the 42 encampments of Parashat Matot-Masei have become one of the most powerful images in the entire Torah. At the level of asterisk peshat, literal meaning, they preserve the historical memory of the Exodus. In the Midrash, they reveal that God remembers every stage of Israel's suffering and transforms it into a story of redemption. In Kabbalah, they are linked to the asterisk Shem Mem-Bet, the 42-letter name, and symbolize the process of the universe's creation, exile, and rectification. In Hasidism, they represent the spiritual biography of each soul, and from the perspective of biblical criticism, they constitute a priestly itinerary that organizes and gives meaning to the geographical and theological traditions of the desert. Perhaps the most profound lesson is this: Israel did not merely traverse a physical desert. That journey also describes the inner path of the human being. We all embark on an exodus from Mitzrayim, the place of constriction and limitation, toward Eretz Yisrael, a symbol of fulfillment and purpose. It is the ongoing journey from fragmentation toward tikkun, from slavery to freedom, and from a scattered life to an existence reconciled with God and with oneself. Now, let us begin to study the 42 stations, one by one. I remind you that a written summary of this lesson will be available on our website, lamishna.com, for your future study. The first 3 stations of the journey through the desert describe far more than a mere geographical movement. In the spiritual interpretation of the Arizal, they represent the initial stages of the soul's awakening. It all begins in Ramesses, the point from which Israel departed Egypt. Literally, it marks the start of the Exodus. Yet in the spiritual realm, Ramesses symbolizes the birth of a new consciousness. The Arizal teaches that every soul begins trapped within its own Egypt. The Hebrew word, asterisk Mitzrayim, is related to asterisk Mitzarim, meaning narrow straits or limitations. It is the place of the habits that dominate us, the fears that paralyze us, the ego that confines us, and all those invisible chains that hinder our growth. No transformation begins as long as one remains comfortable in one's slavery. True change starts when we decide to leave. The second station is Sukkot. Historically, it was the first encampment after leaving Egypt. Spiritually, it represents the first steps toward freedom. However, leaving slavery behind does not mean having achieved stability. The Arizal explains that this stage is fragile. The individual no longer belongs to the past, but has not yet reached their destination. It is a time of learning, uncertainty, and dependence on God. Like the booths, or Sukkot, divine protection exists, even if we do not yet fully comprehend the path we are traversing. The third station is Etham, situated at the edge of the desert. Literally, it marks the entry into an unknown land. In terms of inner experience, it symbolizes the moment we leave all human security behind. The Arizal teaches that no spiritual elevation occurs while remaining within one's comfort zone. Authentic growth demands crossing the threshold of the known and accepting that the desert, with all its uncertainties, is also part of God's purpose. Thus, the first stages of the Exodus reveal a universal principle. First, slavery is broken. Then, one learns to live in freedom. And finally, one finds the courage to walk into the unknown, trusting that God guides us even when we cannot yet see the final destination. The next 3 stages of the desert journey reveal a pattern we all experience at some point in life: crisis, transformation, and renewal. The 4th stage is Pi Hahiroth, located facing the Red Sea. In the biblical account, Israel finds itself trapped between Pharaoh's army and the waters of the sea. From a human perspective, there is no way out. In the spiritual life, this stage represents those moments when we feel that every door has closed and the future seems blocked. The Arizal teaches a profound principle. The greatest obstacle often appears just before a major revelation. The very limit that seems to signal failure can become the place where God opens a completely new path. The sea did not part before the crisis, but in the midst of it. The 5th stage is Mara, a name meaning bitterness. There, the waters were undrinkable. After the euphoria of liberation comes the first great test. Spiritually, Mara reminds us that freedom does not automatically eliminate suffering. Many people believe that starting a new chapter with God means all problems will vanish. However, the Arizal teaches that the true work lies in learning to transform bitterness into growth. The trial does not always change immediately, but the person going through it does. Even the most difficult experiences can become a source of wisdom and maturity. The 6th stage is Elam, an oasis with 12 springs and 70 palm trees. After scarcity comes abundance. After the desert, rest. In the spiritual life, Elam symbolizes those moments of peace when we regain our strength, clarity, and hope. The Arizal explains that God alternates trials with times of restoration. No one can live in a state of constant battle. Rest is also part of growth, for it prepares the heart for the next ascent. These 3 stages reveal a rhythm that repeats itself time and again in human existence. First, we face an obstacle that seems impossible. Then, we learn to transform pain. And finally, we receive a time of renewal that strengthens us to continue the journey toward the promised land. The next 3 stations teach us that spiritual growth depends not only on major events, but also on memory, trust, and faithfulness in the everyday. The 7th station brings us back to Yam Suf, the Red Sea. After the great miracle, the people find themselves by the sea once more. At first glance, this might seem like a mere geographical reference, yet spiritually, it holds a profound lesson. There are moments when we need to revisit the place where God acted in our lives. The Arizal explains that spiritual memory nourishes faith. When we forget where God brought us from, we also forget who has sustained us along the way. Remembering past miracles gives us the strength to face present challenges. The 8th station is the desert of sin, where the gift of manna begins. Literally, this is the moment when God feeds Israel daily from heaven. In the life of the soul, it represents learning dependence. The Arizal notes that manna was never stockpiled to secure the future. The provision needed for the day arrived each day. Authentic trust works the same way. It does not consist of controlling every circumstance, but of learning to receive, day by day, what God knows we need. Mature faith is built one day at a time. The 9th station is Dofka, a place about which the Torah offers little information. Precisely for that reason, it is highly significant. There are stages in our lives that seem unimportant, days devoid of major achievements, memorable events, or extraordinary experiences. Yet the Arizal teaches that there are no spiritually useless days. Even when we perceive no visible progress, God continues to shape our character in silence. Many of the deepest transformations occur precisely during those quiet periods we often overlook. These three stations remind us of an essential truth. The spiritual journey is strengthened when we learn to remember God's faithfulness, trust in His daily provision, and value those small stages, which, though seemingly insignificant, are also part of the process of growth and preparation for the purpose He has for each of us. The next three stations reveal a profound truth. Spiritual life does not move in a straight line. It is composed of periods of apparent calm, moments of crisis, and transformative encounters with God. The 10th station is Alush. The Torah offers few details about this encampment, and therein lies its lesson. In the life of the soul, Alush represents routine, those days when it seems nothing extraordinary is happening. The Arizal explains that the greatest spiritual growth occurs precisely during these quiet moments. Just as a tree develops its roots silently, character is strengthened through daily perseverance, faithfulness in small decisions, and a steadfastness that goes largely unnoticed. The 11th station is Rephidim. There, the people face two decisive trials, a lack of water and an attack by Amalek. In the human experience, Rephidim symbolizes a crisis of faith. After the initial enthusiasm, fatigue, frustration, and questions may arise. The Arizal interprets Amalek as more than just a historical enemy. It represents the doubt that chills the heart and weakens trust in God. It does not always arrive as an outright denial. Often, it appears as a whisper, asking, "Is it really worth going on?" It is precisely in those moments that faith ceases to be merely an emotion and becomes a decision. The 12th station is Mount Sinai, the journey's high point up to that stage. There, Israel receives the Torah and establishes a covenant with God. Spiritually, Sinai represents the discovery of purpose. The Arizal teaches that every person has their own Sinai, that moment when one understands why they were created, and the mission God has entrusted to them. It is not merely a matter of acquiring knowledge, but of hearing a call that transforms one's entire existence. These three stations form an extraordinary sequence. First, we learn to be faithful in the routine. Then, we confront the doubts that test our trust. And finally, we discover the purpose that gives meaning to the entire journey. For the true Sinai does not come by chance. It is the result of remaining steadfast, even when God seems to be working in silence. Stations 13, 14, and 15 reveal that after receiving the revelation at Sinai, the greatest challenge no longer comes from external enemies, but from the human heart. The true battle begins within. The 13th station is Kivrot HaTa'ava, a name meaning the graves of craving. There, the people succumbed to an unruly desire, rejecting the manna and once again longing for the foods of Egypt. Literally, it is the place where greed led to tragic consequences. In the spiritual life, it represents those moments when our impulses cease to be governed by wisdom. The Arizal teaches that physically leaving Egypt does not guarantee having left it internally. Uncontrolled desires can enslave us just as surely as Pharaoh's chains. Authentic freedom does not consist of doing whatever one desires, but of learning to govern one's own desires. The next station is Hazarath. There, Miriam spoke against Moses, and that episode became one of the great biblical lessons on the power of the spoken word. In our lives, Hazaroth represents crises in human relationships, misunderstandings, criticism, hurt feelings, and words spoken without reflection. The Arizal reminds us that language holds immense spiritual power. With a single word, we can restore a life or destroy a relationship. Words are never neutral. They build or tear down invisible worlds. The 15th station is Rithma, traditionally associated with the episode of the 12 spies. After beholding the promised land, fear overcame trust. Spiritually, Rithma represents the moment a person allows fear to dictate their decisions. The Arizal teaches that fear does not merely paralyze us for a day or a week. It can halt decades of growth. An entire generation lost the opportunity to enter the promised land because they believed more in their limitations than in God's promise. These three stations reveal a deeply human sequence. First, we must order our desires. Next, we must guard our words. And finally, we must overcome our fears. Because often, the greatest obstacles to reaching the promised land do not lie before us, but within us. The 16th station is Rimmon Perez. Its name embodies the idea of a rupture, a breach, a fracture. In the spiritual life, it represents failure, that moment when something breaks, an expectation, a relationship, or an idealized image of ourselves. And let's be honest, no one includes failure in their plan for growth. Yet the Arizal teaches that fractures do not always mark the end of a story. Often, they pave the way for a deeper reconstruction. There are structures that can only be renewed after they have been broken. The 17th station is Libna, associated with whiteness. Within the soul, Libna represents purification. After the fall comes the possibility of repentance, teshuva, a return that consists not of denying the error, but of transforming it into wisdom. The Arizal teaches that a new clarity emerges following true repentance. Whiteness does not imply never having been stained. Rather, it signifies having undergone a process of inner cleansing. The 18th station is Risa. The Torah offers few details about this place, and precisely for that reason, it speaks volumes. In the spiritual life, Risa represents slow, almost imperceptible progress. There are stages where one moves forward yet feels no sense of advancement. One prays, studies, and works on oneself, yet everything seems unchanged. The Arizal teaches that not all evolution is immediately visible. Some transformations occur beneath the surface, like seeds quietly germinating before breaking through the earth. These three stations remind us of something essential. Failure can create an opening. Teshuva can bring clarity, and true growth can be taking place even when we do not yet see it. The next stage of the journey teaches us that spiritual growth is never solely an individual matter. The soul matures in relationship with others through constant effort and ultimately through the transformation of its own fears. The 19th station is Kehelata, a name linked to the concept of an assembly or congregation. In a spiritual sense, it represents learning to live in community. No one is called to walk the path alone. The Arizal teaches that no one completes their tikkun, their process of spiritual rectification, in isolation. We need teachers to guide us, friends to encourage us, families to sustain us, and even people to challenge us. Often, God uses human relationships as the primary instrument to shape our character. What we learn by living with others is something we could hardly learn in solitude. The 20th station is Mount Sefer. The image of a mountain always evokes ascent. In the life of the soul, it represents continuous growth, the decision to keep climbing even when the path grows steep. The Arizal reminds us that every ascent demands effort. No one achieves greater closeness to God by chance. Discipline, perseverance, and constancy are the paths of spiritual ascent. Each step may seem small, yet all of them bring us closer to the summit. The 21st station is Jarada, a name meaning trembling or fear. In our daily experience, it symbolizes anxiety, uncertainty, and those moments when the heart is filled with unease. Here, the Arizal offers an extraordinary teaching. Fear need not become an enemy. It can be transformed into reverence for God. There is a difference between paralyzing fear and the reverent awe that awakens humility, wisdom, and trust. When the focus of our lives shifts from anxiety to the presence of God, the very trembling that once weakened us can become a force that draws us closer to the Creator. These three stages reveal a beautiful process. First, we learn that we need others. Then we accept the constant effort of growth. And finally, we discover that even our fears can be transformed into a profound reverence that strengthens our faith and guides our path. Stations 22, 23, and 24 remind us that spiritual growth does not always occur during moments of greatest inspiration. God often shapes our character through community, humility, and seemingly idle times of waiting. Station 22 is Machilot, a name meaning congregations or gatherings. In the life of the soul, it represents a sense of belonging. No one was created to walk entirely alone. The Arizal teaches that the soul finds strength within the people of God. Community is not merely a group of people gathered together. It is the place where we learn to serve, share, forgive, and accept correction. We often imagine that spiritual growth consists solely of prayer or study, yet much of our transformation takes place precisely through living alongside others. The next station is Tachat, meaning beneath. Spiritually, it symbolizes moments of humiliation, times when our abilities, pride, or self-reliance are put to the test. No one enjoys going through such experiences. Yet the Arizal teaches that all true greatness begins with humility. Only a heart that acknowledges its limitations can open itself fully to God's presence. Humility does not mean thinking less of oneself, but rather understanding that every gift we receive finds its true purpose when placed at the service of others. Station 24 is Terech. The Torah offers little information about this place, but in a spiritual reading, it represents periods of stagnation. These are the stages where we feel we are not moving forward, where our prayers seem repetitive, and where the journey has lost its momentum. Here, the Arizal offers a hopeful teaching. God is at work even during the silences. Though we may perceive no movement, he continues to shape the soul. Like a seed buried in the earth, the deepest growth may be occurring precisely when nothing seems to be changing. These 3 seasons teach us that spiritual maturity is born when we learn to belong to a community, accept the school of humility, and trust that even during times of apparent stillness, God continues to work with patience and purpose in the depths of our hearts. Stations 25, 26, and 27 reveal an essential aspect of the spiritual path. God does not merely correct, he also strengthens and consoles. After each process of growth, the soul discovers a deeper joy and a maturity it did not previously possess. Station 25 is Mitka, a name associated with sweetness. In the spiritual life, it represents those moments when the heart once again experiences peace, gratitude, and joy. After trials, struggles, and repentance, there comes a stage where the soul begins to savor the fruits of its transformation. The Arizal teaches that, following judgment, divine mercy can always manifest. God does not correct to destroy, but to restore. The sweetness of Mitka reminds us that the ultimate purpose of the path is not suffering, but communion with the Creator. The next station is Hashmona. In a spiritual reading, it symbolizes inner strength. This is not a matter of physical force or human power, but of the discipline that sustains a life oriented toward God. The Arizal explains that true freedom requires holy habits. Constant prayer, study, generosity, and self-control do not arise from improvisation, but from a decision renewed each day. Spiritual discipline does not limit freedom, it protects and enables it. Station 27 is Moserot, linked to the concept of correction or instruction. In our daily experience, it represents those moments when we are confronted with our errors and called to change. Correction is rarely comfortable, yet the Arizal offers a deeply hopeful perspective. Discipline is an expression of divine love. A parent corrects out of love. A teacher corrects out of a desire for the student to reach their potential. Likewise, God uses discipline to shape a character capable of reflecting his will. These 3 stations form a sequence filled with wisdom. First comes the sweetness of mercy, then the strength born of discipline, and finally, the correction that perfects the soul. For God's purpose is never simply to point out our weaknesses, but to transform us until we can live with greater freedom, greater maturity, and a joy that endures, even along the journey. Stations 28, 29, and 30 teach us that spiritual growth does not end when we reach a certain level of maturity. Each new stage brings a different responsibility, receiving an inheritance, overcoming the ego, and properly stewarding blessings. The 28th station is Bene Jachin. Beyond its geographical location, this station can be understood as a symbol of spiritual inheritance. No generation starts from scratch. We all receive a history, a tradition, values, and teachings passed down by those who walked before us. However, the Arizal explains that each generation receives a distinct mission. It is not enough to preserve the legacy. We must also develop it and respond to the challenges of our own time. Honoring the past means allowing its principles to continue breathing life into the present. The next station is Hor Haggid, associated with the image of a mountain. In Scripture, mountains often represent places of encounter with God, but they also symbolize the effort required to reach greater spiritual heights. The Arizal teaches that the most difficult mountain to climb lies not outside us, but within us. It is the ascent over the ego, self-sufficiency, and the desire to place our own will above the divine will. Every step toward God demands that we leave something behind and learn to view things from a higher perspective. The 30th station is Japheth, described as a land rich in waters. After so many years in the desert, abundance appears as a gift from God. In the spiritual life, it represents times of prosperity, when we receive resources, opportunities, health, or influence. Yet the Arizal warns that abundance is also a test. It is easier to recognize our need for God in times of scarcity than in times of prosperity. Therefore, blessings must never become an end in themselves, but rather tools for serving the Creator and blessing others. These three stations remind us of a fundamental lesson. We receive an inheritance to fulfill a mission. We climb mountains to overcome our ego, and we are blessed with abundance so that we, in turn, may become instruments of blessing. Only then does the spiritual journey attain its full depth and purpose. Stations 31, 32, and 33 lead us to one of the most important lessons of the spiritual path. Growing does not mean ceasing to change, assuming responsibilities, or becoming free from the possibility of making mistakes. Station 31 is Abrona. Its name evokes the idea of crossing over, of moving from one place to another. In the life of the soul, it represents any significant transition, leaving a stage behind, closing a cycle, and beginning another. The Arizal teaches that no authentic change occurs without renunciation. Every transition demands that we bid farewell to a former identity. We cannot become the person God calls us to be while clinging to a version of ourselves that has already fulfilled its purpose. Crossing over always implies leaving something behind in order to receive what lies ahead. Station 32 is Ezion Geber. Spiritually, it symbolizes maturity. After a long journey through the wilderness, the people approach a new stage of responsibility. The same holds true in life. There comes a moment when we cease to be apprentices and become people called to serve, teach, and sustain others. The Arizal explains that spiritual maturity is measured not by how much we know, but by the responsibility we are capable of assuming with humility and faithfulness. Station 33 brings us to Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, the setting for the episode of the waters of Meribah. There, even Moses, the great leader of Israel, made a mistake that had profound consequences. This scene conveys a lesson grounded in realism. The Arizal reminds us that spiritual growth never entirely eliminates the possibility of error. No human being, however exalted, ceases to need vigilance, humility, and reliance on God. Greatness lies not in infallibility, but in remaining faithful, even when we acknowledge our own limitations. These three stages form a powerful sequence. First, we learn to cross over into a new identity. Then, we accept the weight of responsibility. And finally, we understand that spiritual maturity does not consist of absolute perfection, but of walking in humility, aware that we are always continuing to grow under God's guidance and mercy. Stations 34, 35, and 36 lead us to one of the most intense stretches of the journey. They speak of loss, suffering, and a process of inner refinement that, however difficult, can profoundly transform the soul. Station 34 is Mount Hor. It is there that Aaron, the first high priest and one of Israel's great leaders, dies. It is, quite literally, the moment of a historic farewell. In the spiritual life, Mount Hor represents all the losses that mark our existence: the departure of a loved one, the end of a chapter, a shifting vocation, or a closing door. The Arizal teaches that every farewell prepares the soul for a new stage. Although the pain is real, God can turn every ending into the beginning of a deeper purpose. No loss has the final word when we walk with Him. Station 35 is Zalmona, associated with the episode of the fiery serpents. The people experience pain as a consequence of their own rebellion, and the only hope arises when they lift their gaze toward the bronze serpent God commanded to be raised. Spiritually, Zalmona represents the crises that force us to stop looking solely at our circumstances and instead turn our eyes to the Creator. The Arizal explains that suffering, while never desirable in itself, can awaken a spiritual depth that comfort rarely produces. There are moments when only pain teaches us to look toward heaven. Station 36 is Punan. In a spiritual reading, it symbolizes the refinement of the soul. After passing through the trial, the person is no longer the same. The Arizal teaches that suffering endured well does not harden the heart, but purifies it. The fire that destroys impurity is the same fire that strengthens precious metal. Likewise, trials can reveal a more authentic faith, a deeper compassion, and a trust in God that is far more solid than before. These three stations remind us that the path to the Promised Land also passes through the valley of loss and trials. But when pain is experienced hand in hand with God, it ceases to be mere suffering and becomes an instrument of transformation, refinement, and hope for the soul. Stations 37, 38, and 39 signal that the long journey through the desert is drawing to a close. After years of learning, trials, and transformation, the soul begins to discover that nothing experienced along the way was in vain. Station 37 is Oboth. In a spiritual sense, it represents the final preparation before entering a new stage. After so many experiences, the people are no longer the same as those who left Egypt. The Arizal teaches that before a significant purpose is realized, God often quietly prepares the heart. It is a time when many pieces of the journey begin to fall into place. What once seemed like a succession of isolated events begins to reveal a design. Final preparation consists not merely of acquiring more knowledge, but of being inwardly ready to receive the mission God has been shaping from the very beginning. Station 38 is Iye Abarim. Spiritually, it symbolizes the moment of looking back with a new understanding. There is a difference between remembering the past and understanding it. The Arizal explains that as one advances in the spiritual life, one begins to recognize how God guided one's entire history, even during moments that seemed confusing or painful. What once appeared to be a series of coincidences begins to reveal a constant providence. The desert is no longer viewed as a waste of time, but as the school where the soul was prepared. Station 39 is Diban Gad. In the inner experience, it represents the beginning of the reward. It is not a matter of material blessings alone, but of beholding the first fruits of persevering effort. The Arizal teaches that faithful sowing always yields a harvest. Patience, discipline, tears, and trials begin to transform into wisdom, peace, and inner strength. The journey is not yet over, but it is already possible to see the results of a life walked alongside God. These three stations teach us that spiritual maturity allows us to look at the past with gratitude, live the present with hope, and approach the future with the certainty that God never wastes a single step taken on the path toward His purpose for our lives. The final 3 stations of the journey represent the culmination of a long process of transformation. After 42 stages, the people stand at the threshold of the Promised Land, and the soul is prepared for a new level of existence. The 40th station is Almon Diblathaim. In a spiritual reading, it symbolizes maturity. After so many trials, setbacks, lessons, and restorations, the soul no longer reacts with the same instability it showed at the beginning of the path. The Arizal teaches that true maturity does not consist of ceasing to face difficulties, but rather of acquiring an inner stability that endures even when circumstances change. Peace ceases to depend on external events and begins to spring from a deep relationship with God. The 41st station is the mountains of Abarim. From there, Moses gazes upon the Promised Land before the people cross into it. It is a scene filled with hope. In the spiritual life, it represents vision. There are moments when God allows us to behold, even from afar, that which we have not yet attained. The Arizal explains that this anticipatory vision is not meant to stir up impatience, but to strengthen hope and renew one's strength. Whoever can see the purpose clearly finds reasons to persevere until the end. Finally, the 42nd station leads us to the plains of Moab, the last encampment before crossing the Jordan River. The journey through the wilderness has concluded. According to the Arizal, the soul has refined the asterisk nitzotzot, the spiritual sparks it was meant to elevate during its existence. It is ready to cross the Jordan, a symbol of the transition to a higher level of consciousness and the fulfillment of the mission for which it was created. The Hasidic interpretation, inspired by the Baal Shem Tov, takes this teaching to its greatest depth. No station was unnecessary. No trial was an accident. Neither joy nor suffering fell outside of God's plan. Each stage contributed to the asterisk tikkun, the personal rectification of the soul. When we look at the entire journey, we realize that the true destination was never merely reaching a land, but rather becoming, step by step, people capable of living in complete harmony with the divine will. That is the authentic journey of the desert, and it is also the journey of every human being. That concludes today's lesson. Thank you very much for studying with us. Remember to visit us at lamishnah.com, and here are a couple of videos so you can continue studying with us. Shalom.